Did you ever imagine that the vaccines the government wants you to give your infant could actually do more harm than good? It's a frightening notion, but it just might be true. Hi, I'm Deborah Ball. Welcome to The Truth Exposed, where we ask important questions and get the truth of the matter. In this very important edition about children's vaccinations, we have a special guest who's written a shocking book that exposes what the pharmaceutical companies don't want you to know about vaccines. I'm going to warn you, this is explosive and shocking information you need to know to make the best decisions in protecting yourself and your children. So let's get started and bring out our special guest. He's an independent vaccine researcher and author of the book, What the Pharmaceutical Companies Don't Want You to Know About Vaccines. Please welcome Dr. Todd Elsner. Thank you very much for coming today, Dr. Elsner, and for appearing on The Truth Exposed.
My pleasure.
You know, I've read this book, and you really have some shocking and disturbing information in here. But before we look inside the book, what grabs me is the cover. Can you explain the cover of this book and what it means?
The cover of this book is an actual representation of what happens to a child today from birth through the age of 6. However, the cover only tells half the story. If you count the syringes in the infant, you'll come up with 18. This is only half the number of shots that an infant receives from birth through the age of 6. If you count the syringes in the background, you'll come up with 63. This number represents half the number of vaccines that children today receive from birth through the age of 6. Now let's look at the ingredients and side effects in those syringes. Guess where I got those from?
Where?
Those came directly from the vaccine package inserts, which came directly from our friends at the pharmaceutical companies.
But let me ask you, if vaccines may not necessarily be good for our children, why are they mandatory and required? And why is it so important that parents get the information in your book?
Oh, well, first answer, they're not necessarily good. How can it be good to inject hazardous waste, known carcinogens, harsh poisons, potent neurotoxins, and cancer-causing animal viruses into teeny tiny babies? And all this in the name of health. There are 3 points that I address in this book. Point number 1, vaccines are not responsible for the decline or eradication of communicable disease. Point number 2, vaccines have done nothing but promote chronic disease and illness. And point number 3, vaccines contain the most toxic chemicals on the planet. I have close to 2,000 references that back up those statements, and the references come from peer-reviewed studies, the CDC, the FDA, the IOM, and U.S. congressional hearings. So if anyone from the medical profession wants to argue with the information in this book, they're going to argue among themselves. It is their information.
Now, I have a question. Vaccines take many years of research and billions of dollars to develop. They're supposed to stop the spread of serious disease. How can a vaccine developed for the good of everyone not be beneficial?
Vaccines never have been tested to see if they cause cancer, cause DNA changes, or if they impair fertility. For example, the anthrax vaccine being used today on our troops is not only worthless, it's an illegal vaccine. The vaccine causes lifelong side effects, and I cover these side effects in detail in my book. Another example is the measles vaccine. Measles was nearly 99% eradicated before the vaccine was ever introduced in 1963. Guess what this vaccine has caused?
What?
It's in the book. Another one is the new HPV vaccine, Gardasil. This vaccine is completely worthless. In fact, 28 women have died to date from this vaccine, and there have been thousands of reported side effects. See, this is where Big Pharma makes its money. Sure, they make money from the vaccines, but the real money is in treating the side effects that the vaccines create. According to Merck's own studies, guess how many serious adverse side effects their new HPV vaccine will cause?
I don't know.
It's in the book.
Well, you know, my doctor recommends the flu vaccine. Is the flu vaccine okay?
First, I would recommend getting a new doctor. The CDC claims that 36,000 people a year die from the flu. This is a complete lie. In fact, according to the CDC's own documents, in 2001 there were only 257 deaths from the flu. But here's the real bombshell. The flu vaccine contains thimerosal. This contains mercury, the second most toxic chemical on the planet, according to the FDA. Now, have you heard in the news that there's a link between vaccines and autism?
Yeah.
Well, there is a chemical right here that is responsible for our current autism epidemic. The information doesn't come from me, it comes from the United States Congress. They concluded after 8 independent investigations that the current autism epidemic could have been prevented or at least reduced if the FDA had not been asleep at the switch. Eli Lilly, the manufacturer of thimerosal, is now selling another drug called Strattera. Guess who they market this drug to?
Who?
Children with autism. This is just one more example of how a pharmaceutical company's product injured children, and then they sell another drug to treat the disease.
Wow.
This is where the real money is. Guess what other disease thimerosal causes? And it's in the elderly.
What?
It's in the book.
Wow, this is shocking, but let me be the skeptic here. You're contradicting the government, the FDA, the CDC, and pharmaceutical companies that spend billions on research. Why should we believe you?
I am contradicting the pharmaceutical companies, the CDC, the FDA, and other government agencies using their own information. For example, in my book, I document the CDC's own studies that show a 90% increased risk of diabetes with the use of a certain vaccine. Another example is a study done by a pharmaceutical company that shows their vaccine causes diabetes. I name the company and I name the vaccine in the book. How much do you think it costs to treat diabetes over a person's lifetime?
I'm sure it's astronomical.
See, this is where they make the money.
Now probably the most famous vaccine of all is the polio vaccine. I think we've all had it as kids, but polio is pretty much wiped out. Is there anything in your book about the polio vaccine?
Society believes that polio was eradicated by the vaccine. Nothing could be further from the truth. In my book, I cite government documents containing testimony from the developers of the polio vaccine. They state the vaccine itself was the cause of paralytic polio. In fact, all the cases of polio in the United States since 1979 have been caused from the vaccine. This is a fact readily admitted by the CDC. Wait until you read what the CDC did to lie to Americans and dupe them into believing polio was eradicated by the vaccine. You're going to get mad. The polio vaccine didn't eradicate polio, but the scientific literature did reveal that the polio vaccine is the cause of our current AIDS pandemic, and it causes cancer. 60 labs around the world have confirmed that the polio vaccine causes cancer. Guess which lab denies this?
Which one?
The FDA. That's 60 to 1. I don't think you can trust the FDA. Today in America, a child receives 126 vaccines from birth through the age of 6. Not only do vaccines overwhelm the immune system, but the chemicals in these vaccines cause chronic disease and illness, like autism, allergies, asthma, ADD, ADHD. The list is endless. I want to be perfectly clear on this next issue. There is no such thing as a safe vaccine. In my opinion, there is no vaccine that is safe for newborns and infants, and therefore parents should have the option to refuse having these poisons injected into their children. Furthermore, I will be labeled by the pro-vaccination community as anti-vaccine. But if being anti-vaccine means that I am against injecting hazardous waste, known carcinogens, harsh poisons, potent neurotoxins, and cancer-causing animal viruses into our most precious and innocent form of life, our children, then I will be the first to label myself as anti-vaccine. But on the other hand, I consider myself a children's healthcare advocate. These children have no voice, and in some cases, the parents have no choice. I am not the only one speaking out against vaccines. In 2000, a medical organization composed of over 5,000 medical doctors and surgeons voted unanimously to end the immunization program.
Claims that the smallpox vaccine was not necessary. Smallpox, the Black Death? Okay, I'm a little skeptical about this. Convince me you're right.
That's a good question, and I address this issue in its entirety in my book. The smallpox vaccine is what the current national immunization program is founded on. This premise is the greatest hoax that has ever been perpetrated on the American people. It is founded on the fact that by injecting an animal virus, cowpox, into a human being, they will become immune to smallpox. The only study that was ever done on this was by a farmer that injected the cowpox virus into 2 children, both of whom died from tuberculosis. And thus, the NIP was born. The fact is that the countries with the highest immunization rates for smallpox had the most severe outbreaks of smallpox. It wasn't until parents began to refuse the vaccine that infant deaths from smallpox started to decline. The real cause for the eradication of smallpox was improvement in sanitation, nutrition, hygiene, and quarantine. Did you know that there are 3 vaccines that cannot be manufactured unless the manufacturing process uses aborted fetal cells. I dedicated an entire chapter to the role abortion has in the development of these vaccines. Did you know the World Health Organization experimented on women in the Philippines with a certain vaccine? Now, these women can't have children. The WHO says it was an accident, but that's a lie, and I prove it in my book. I also reveal some of the horrible ingredients you'll find in vaccines, like formaldehyde, antifreeze, aluminum, borax, which is used for cockroach control, and aborted cow blood, just to name a few.
Why don't the big pharmaceutical companies want us to know the information you've packed in the pages?
They don't want people to have this information because it affects their place of worship. That place of worship is money. It is absolutely sick what these companies put profits before children, but that is exactly what is going on today. Pharmaceutical companies are publicly traded corporations. They have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to increase profits. How do you increase profits? Sell more vaccines, create more side effects, which will lead to an increase in sales of drugs used to treat these side effects. Ultimately, that creates more profits for the shareholders. This is their business model, and it's our children who are affected.